When I first moved into Oak Ridge Estates, it felt like I had finally found my forever home. The neighborhood was beautiful, tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. For someone like me, who had spent years dealing with mobility challenges after a spinal injury, this place seemed perfect. Quiet, peaceful, and close-knit. It was exactly what I needed to start fresh. One of the first things I did after moving in was make my house more accessible for myself. I hired a contractor to build a smooth, gently sloped pathway from my front door to the sidewalk. It wasn't just any pathway. It was specially designed for wheelchairs, sturdy and wide enough for easy movement. Every detail mattered because, for me, this wasn't just concrete, it was freedom. Freedom to come and go without asking for help, freedom to live as independently as possible. That pathway meant everything to me. But there was another side to my story, one that most people in the neighborhood didn't know about. My family had sold a business years ago, and while I never flaunted my wealth or made a big deal out of it, I believed in using what I had to support causes I cared about. One of those causes became the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, HOA. Without telling anyone, I started funding nearly all of its expenses. From landscaping projects to holiday decorations, I covered the costs quietly, happy to see the community thrive. The HOA president, Mr. Caldwell, often praised me privately for my contributions. He'd call me the backbone of the neighborhood and thank me for keeping things running smoothly. To everyone else, I was just another friendly face at block parties or community events. No one suspected that the reason our HOA could afford so many improvements was because of me, and honestly, I preferred it that way. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to belong. So when Mr. Caldwell called me one evening to discuss a minor issue, I wasn't worried. In fact, I assumed it would be something simple, maybe a question about upcoming projects or budget approvals. Maybe he'd even compliment my new pathway, since it matched the aesthetic of the neighborhood so well. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, Mr. Caldwell showed up at my doorstep with two other members of the HOA board. They stood stiffly on my porch, clutching clipboards and looking oddly serious. At first, I thought they were joking when they said some neighbors had complained about my pathway. Complained? About what? It was functional, safe, and blended perfectly with the rest of my property. But as they explained further, their tone grew colder. It's not compliant with our aesthetic guidelines, Mr. Caldwell said matter-of-factly. Some residents feel it's too modern, too industrial-looking. It doesn't fit the traditional charm of Oak Ridge. I stared at them, stunned. This pathway wasn't just some decorative addition. It was essential for my daily life. How could anyone object to something so important? Before I could argue, Mr. Caldwell delivered the final blow. We'll need you to remove it immediately, or we'll have no choice but to issue fines. As they walked away, leaving me standing there speechless, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, disbelief, and sadness. How could the same organization I supported so generously turn around and treat me like this? Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that would test not only my patience, but also the very foundation of trust within my community. The days following that conversation with Mr. Caldwell felt surreal, like I was living in some strange alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the way he'd spoken so casually about destroying something so vital to me. How could anyone look at my pathway and see anything other than what it truly was, a lifeline? But as the initial shock wore off, frustration began to take its place. I decided to fight back, not aggressively, but logically. After all, this was an HOA, not some tyrannical council. Surely, reason and facts would prevail. I spent hours gathering information, printing out pictures of similar accessible pathways from other neighborhoods, and even consulting with architects who specialized in universal design. I wanted to show them that functionality and aesthetics weren't mutually exclusive, that my pathway wasn't just practical, but also visually appealing if you took the time to appreciate it. When I arrived at the next HOA meeting, I felt prepared, armed with documents, diagrams, and even a heartfelt letter explaining why the pathway mattered so much to me. I walked into the room expecting at least a fair hearing. What I got instead was a cold shoulder and thinly veiled hostility. The board members sat stiffly around the table, their expressions blank, but their body language closed off. As soon as I started speaking, I could tell they weren't listening. They interrupted me constantly, nitpicking over minor details and dismissing my points before I could finish making them. Mrs. Langley, the treasurer, chimed in with a sarcastic remark about how modern designs were fine for cities, but didn't belong in a traditional neighborhood like ours. It was infuriating, but what hurt the most was the lack of empathy. These people knew me, or at least they thought they did. They saw me at every community event, smiled when I brought cookies to meetings, and accepted my contributions without question. Yet here they were, treating me like an outsider, someone whose needs were inconvenient and disposable. Mr. Caldwell tried to soften the blow by suggesting compromises, though none of them were reasonable. He proposed adding flower beds along the sides of the pathway to soften its appearance, as if slapping a few petunias on top of concrete would solve the problem. Another suggestion involved replacing the smooth surface with cobblestones, which would have been impossible for my wheelchair to navigate safely. It became clear that these weren't genuine solutions. They were excuses to avoid addressing the real issue. As the meeting dragged on, I noticed subtle things that had escaped me before. The glances exchanged between board members, the awkward silences whenever I mentioned disability rights, the way they avoided using words like accessibility or inclusion. It dawned on me then that this wasn't just about a pathway, it was about control. The HOA didn't want exceptions. They wanted uniformity, no matter the cost. By the end of the session, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I left the room feeling defeated but determined. If logic and kindness weren't enough to sway them, maybe there was another way to make them understand. That night, as I rolled down my pathway one last time before bed, I promised myself that I wouldn't give up. Not on my home, not on my independence, and certainly not on proving a point. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come, because while I was busy strategizing and preparing for the next step, the HOA had already moved ahead with plans of their own. Plans that would leave me reeling and force me to confront the true nature of the community I'd worked so hard to support. The days after that disastrous HOA meeting were a blur of restless nights and racing thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Every time I looked out my window, I half expected to see someone standing there watching me. Paranoia. Maybe. But given how things had gone so far, it didn't feel entirely irrational. Then, one morning, it happened. The sound hit me first, a sharp grinding noise that jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was construction work down the street, but when I pulled back the curtains, my heart sank. A crew of workers, armed with jackhammers and shovels, was tearing apart my pathway, the very same pathway I relied on every single day. Dust filled the air as chunks of concrete flew in all directions, leaving behind nothing but rubble. I threw on my robe and rushed outside, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheels of my chair. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with disbelief. The foreman barely glanced at me, holding up a clipboard like some kind of shield. "Orders from the HOA," he said flatly, his tone devoid of emotion. "Sorry, Mom." "Orders," I repeated, incredulous. "You can't just destroy private property without warning." But no one listened. The workers kept going, methodically dismantling what had taken weeks to build. Neighbors began trickling out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood silently on their lawns, arms crossed, while others whispered among themselves. Not a single person stepped forward to stop them. Not even Mrs. Harper next door, who always waved hello whenever she saw me struggling with groceries. Their silence spoke volumes, louder than any words ever could. Standing there, powerless, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, humiliation, betrayal. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the last remnants of my independence being reduced to debris. It wasn't just about the pathway anymore. It was about respect. Respect for my needs, my contributions, and my humanity. And yet none of that seemed to matter to the people I'd once called neighbors. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the jagged remains of my front yard. My mind raced with questions. How could they do this? Did they really hate my pathway that much, or was it something deeper? Was it because I was different? Because I needed accommodations they didn't understand, or worse, didn't care to understand? That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about aesthetics or rules. It was about power. The HOA wanted control, plain and simple. They thrived on conformity, punishing anyone who dared to step out of line. And now, they'd made an example of me, sending a clear message to the rest of the neighborhood. Play by our rules, or face the consequences. As night fell, I found myself replaying old memories in my head. Block parties, holiday lights, casual chats over garden fences. Had those moments been real, or had I imagined the warmth and camaraderie? Was I ever truly part of this community, or was I just a convenient benefactor whose money smoothed over cracks no one wanted to acknowledge? By the time dawn broke, exhaustion had given way to determination. If they thought breaking my pathway would break me, they were wrong. I might have lost the battle, but the war was far from over. I owed it to myself, and to anyone else who felt silenced, to fight back. Because if I didn't, who would? And deep down, I knew exactly where to start. The morning after the destruction of my pathway, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. The anger that had burned inside me wasn't going away. It was fuel now, driving me toward action. I couldn't let this injustice slide. Not for myself, and not for anyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation someday. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to a system that valued rules over people. I started by gathering evidence. My phone became my weapon as I photographed the ruined remains of my pathway from every angle. The jagged edges, the piles of broken concrete, the empty space where independence used to live. Then I dug deeper, pulling together documents that proved how much I had contributed to the HOA over the years. Bank statements, donation receipts, emails from Mr. Caldwell thanking me for keeping the neighborhood afloat. All of it painted a picture of someone who had given so much yet received so little in return. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to neighbors I trusted, or at least thought I did. Sarah from 2 doors down had always been kind, often stopping to chat when she saw me outside. Tom, the retired teacher across the street, had once complimented my garden and even offered to help plant flowers. These were small gestures, but they mattered to me. Surely they would understand what I was going through. To my surprise, some of them did. When I showed them the photos and explained how the HOA had acted, their faces softened with sympathy. "That's terrible," Sarah said, shaking her head. "They can't treat you like this." Tom frowned, muttering something about bullies hiding behind rules. But others hesitated, their discomfort evident. One neighbor, Lisa, even admitted, "I wanted to say something when I saw them tearing it up, but I didn't want to cause trouble." Her words stung more than I expected. It wasn't just fear of conflict. It was fear of rocking the boat, of challenging the status quo. And that realization hit hard. If my own neighbors couldn't muster the courage to speak up, how could I expect anyone else to? Still, I refused to give up. The next step was writing a letter, a long, detailed account of everything that had happened, addressed to every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates. I poured my heart into those pages, explaining why the pathway mattered, detailing my contributions to the HOA, and calling out the hypocrisy of an organization that claimed to care about community while trampling over one of its own members. I ended with a simple plea. If we don't stand together now, who will protect us when it's your turn? Distributing the letters was nerve-wracking. I slipped them into mailboxes late at night, my hands trembling as I imagined the reactions they might spark. Would people dismiss me as dramatic or selfish? Or would they see the bigger issue at play? By morning, my inbox was flooded with messages. Some were supportive, people apologizing for staying silent, promising to attend the next HOA meeting to demand answers. Others were defensive, accusing me of exaggerating or stirring up drama. But the most surprising response came from Mr. Caldwell himself. He called me, his voice tense but tinged with panic. "This is escalating quickly," he said. "Maybe we should reconsider our approach." "Reconsider?" I shot back, my tone icy. "You destroyed something essential to my life without a second thought. There's no reconsidering this. It's too late for that." He tried to backtrack, offering vague promises of compromise. But I cut him off. "Save it for the meeting," I said, "because I'll be there, and so will everyone else." As I hung up, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt ready, not just to face them, but to fight. The pathway may have been gone, but my resolve was stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't back down. The day of the emergency HOA meeting arrived, and the air felt electric with tension. It wasn't just another routine gathering. This time, the entire neighborhood had turned out. People packed into the community center, spilling into extra chairs set up along the walls. Whispers buzzed like static in the background as everyone waited for the showdown to begin. Some faces were curious, others wary, but all eyes were on me when I wheeled myself into the room. I could feel their stares, the weight of judgment, pity, maybe even guilt. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if they didn't listen? What if my voice got drowned out by excuses and deflections? But then I remembered why I was there, not just for myself, but for anyone who'd ever felt powerless against the system. Taking a deep breath, I rolled to the front of the room, positioning myself directly in front of Mr. Caldwell and the rest of the board. Mr. Caldwell stood to speak first, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous fidgeting. "We understand there are concerns," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "and we're here to address them openly and fairly." His words sounded rehearsed, hollow. He glanced at me briefly before looking away, clearly uncomfortable under the collective gaze of the crowd. When it was my turn, I didn't mince words. I started by holding up one of the photos of my destroyed pathway. "This isn't just concrete," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "It's my independence, my ability to live without asking for help every time I need to leave my house." And yet, the HOA tore it apart without warning, because it didn't fit their idea of traditional charm. The room grew quieter, the murmurs fading as people leaned forward to listen. I went on, sharing how much I had contributed to the HOA over the years. Money that paid for their events, their landscaping, their sense of pride. "I did this because I believed in our community," I continued, my voice rising slightly. "But now I have to ask, do you believe in me? In any of us who might need accommodations or understanding?" For a moment, there was silence. Then someone in the back spoke up. A woman named Karen, whose son used a walker after an accident last year. "She's right," she said, standing slowly. "What happens when it's my kid who needs something different? Will you tear that down too?" Her question hung heavy in the air, prompting nods from others around her. One by one, more voices joined in. Tom, the retired teacher, pointed out how hypocritical it was to claim the pathway didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic while ignoring the cracked sidewalks and faded paint on common areas. Sarah admitted she'd been afraid to speak up before, but now realized staying silent only made things worse. Even Lisa, who had earlier apologized for doing nothing, raised her hand timidly and said, "I shouldn't have let fear stop me. We can do better than this." As the tide turned, the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Langley tried to interject, insisting that rules existed for a reason, but her arguments fell flat against the growing chorus of dissent. Mr. Caldwell looked pale, gripping the edge of the table, as if bracing himself for impact. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he stammered. "There's always room for compromise." "Compromise," I repeated, letting the word hang for a beat. "You already took everything from me. There's nothing left to compromise." By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted completely. A petition circulated through the crowd, demanding accountability from the board, including resignations and a commitment to prioritize accessibility moving forward. Nearly every homeowner present signed it, their signatures a testament to the power of unity. As I watched them pass the paper around, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. But the fight wasn't over yet. The real challenge lay ahead: rebuilding trust, repairing relationships, and ensuring that no one else would ever face what I had. Still, as I left the community center that evening, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time, I truly felt like part of a neighborhood, not because of shared aesthetics or perfect lawns, but because we were finally starting to stand together. The days following the explosive HOA meeting were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. The petition demanding change had spread like wildfire, igniting conversations across Oak Ridge estates that many residents hadn't dared to have before. People who had once kept their heads down and avoided conflict now found themselves questioning everything: the rigid rules, the lack of inclusivity, and the unchecked power of the HOA board. It was as if my story had cracked open a dam, releasing years of pent-up frustration and unspoken grievances. Mr. Caldwell and his team scrambled to respond, but it was clear they were on shaky ground. They called another meeting just 2 days later, this time inviting everyone, not just the usual attendees, to discuss next steps. When I arrived, I noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. The board members sat stiffly at the front, their expressions uneasy, while neighbors greeted me warmly, some even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. When Mr. Caldwell stood to address the crowd, his tone was markedly different, less authoritative, more conciliatory. "We hear your concerns," he began, glancing nervously at the packed room, "and we're committed to making things right." He outlined vague promises about revising guidelines and forming a new committee focused on accessibility, but his words felt hollow. Everyone could see through the thinly veiled attempt to save face. That's when Sarah stepped forward. She'd become an unexpected ally in all of this, her quiet determination inspiring others to join the cause. "Promises aren't enough," she said firmly, holding up the signed petition. "Actions matter. We need real change, starting with leadership." Her statement sparked applause, and soon others chimed in with specific demands: transparency in decision-making, representation for marginalized voices, and immediate plans to rebuild accessible pathways throughout the neighborhood, not just mine. The pressure mounted visibly on the board members, their faces pale under the weight of accountability. Finally, Mrs. Langley spoke up, her voice trembling. Perhaps it's time for fresh perspectives," she admitted reluctantly. One by one, the board members resigned, citing personal reasons or health concerns, though everyone knew the truth: they couldn't withstand the storm they'd helped create. With the old guard gone, the community came together to elect new leaders. This time, the process was open and democratic, with candidates presenting clear platforms focused on fairness and inclusion. To my surprise, several neighbors encouraged me to run for a position on the board. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be seen as someone seeking revenge or control, but ultimately I agreed. If I could help steer the neighborhood toward meaningful change, how could I say no? As the dust settled, work began on rebuilding my pathway, and not just as a personal victory, but as a symbol of progress. Contractors consulted with accessibility experts, ensuring the design met universal standards while blending seamlessly with the neighborhood aesthetic. Neighbors volunteered to help, planting flowers along the edges and adding decorative stones to make it welcoming for everyone. Watching them work side by side filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. But the biggest shift wasn't in the physical changes. It was in the way people treated each other. Conversations that had once been superficial now carried depth and sincerity. Strangers introduced themselves with genuine smiles, asking how they could help rather than turning away. Even small gestures, like holding doors open or offering rides to those in need, became common sights around Oak Ridge Estates. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. True transformation takes time, effort, and constant vigilance. But as I rolled down my newly rebuilt pathway for the first time, sunlight warming my face and neighbors waving hello, I allowed myself a moment of quiet pride. We had taken a stand, not just for accessibility, but for kindness, understanding, and unity. And in doing so, we had proven that even the smallest cracks can let in the light. Months had passed since the upheaval in Oak Ridge Estates, and the neighborhood was almost unrecognizable, not because of new paint or landscaping, but because of the way people treated each other. The changes weren't just superficial. They ran deep, like roots slowly strengthening the foundation of a tree after a storm. My pathway, once reduced to rubble, now stood as a testament to resilience, a smooth, elegant stretch of concrete lined with vibrant flowers and thoughtful design. It wasn't just functional, it was beautiful, blending seamlessly into the community while serving its purpose. But the transformation went far beyond my front yard. Under the new HOA leadership, people who genuinely cared about inclusivity and fairness, the neighborhood began to evolve in ways I never imagined. Accessibility projects sprang up everywhere: widened sidewalks, ramps at community entrances, even benches placed strategically along walking paths for those who needed rest. For the first time, Oak Ridge Estates felt like a place where anyone could belong, regardless of age, ability, or circumstance. What struck me most, though, was how attitudes shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now stopped to chat when they saw me outside. Kids raced down the streets on bikes, waving enthusiastically as they passed. At block parties, conversations flowed easily, filled with laughter and shared stories rather than polite small talk. Even Mr. Caldwell, who had moved away shortly after resigning from the board, sent a letter apologizing for his role in the conflict. While forgiveness didn't come easily, his words reminded me that growth is possible, even for those who make mistakes. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Sarah joined me with 2 cups of tea in hand. "You've changed this place," she said, handing me one of the steaming mugs. Her tone wasn't flattery, it was gratitude. I shook my head, smiling softly. "Not me," I replied. "All of us. This was never something I could do alone." She nodded thoughtfully, sipping her tea. "Still, you started it. You showed us what standing up for what's right looks like." Her words lingered long after she left, making me reflect on everything that had happened. Standing up hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been terrifying. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of opposition felt unbearable. But looking back, I realized that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. And in doing so, I'd inspired others to find their own voices. The HOA meetings became something entirely different under the new leadership. Gone were the rigid rules and stifling formality. Instead, discussions focused on collaboration and empathy. Residents shared ideas openly, knowing their input mattered. When someone proposed turning an empty lot into a community garden, the whole neighborhood rallied behind it, volunteering time and resources to bring the vision to life. Watching families tend to plots side by side, sharing tips and stories, felt like witnessing the heartbeat of our community grow stronger. Even the little things reflected change. Holiday decorations now included accessible features, like lowered displays for children in wheelchairs to enjoy. Community events offered quiet zones for those overwhelmed by crowds. These small adjustments might have seemed insignificant to some, but to those who benefited from them, they meant the world. As I rolled down my pathway toward the park one crisp morning, I noticed a group of kids playing tag near the playground. One boy, using crutches, laughed as he chased his friends across the rubberized surface designed to prevent falls. His joy was contagious, spreading smiles among parents seated nearby. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in myself, but in all of us. We had created a space where everyone mattered, where differences weren't barriers but bridges. Life in Oak Ridge Estates wasn't perfect anymore, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Perfection implies stagnation, a refusal to grow or adapt. What we had instead was progress, messy, imperfect, and alive with possibility. Every challenge had taught us something valuable. Every misstep had pushed us closer to understanding. And through it all, we had learned that true strength lies not in uniformity, but in embracing diversity, in welcoming the unique needs and perspectives that make a community whole. Now, whenever I glide down my pathway, sunlight warming my face and neighbors exchanging friendly waves, I feel a profound sense of peace. This journey had tested me in ways I couldn't have anticipated, but it had also given me something priceless. Hope. Hope that kindness can triumph over indifference, that unity can overcome division, and that even the smallest acts of courage can spark lasting change. And in the end, isn't that what community is all about?